When my husband threw the ultrasound photo on the dining table, he had a smirk on his face. "My sister is pregnant with twins and they're mine," he said, waiting for me to break down. For 8 years of marriage, he and his mother had humiliated me for not giving them an heir. They thought this ultimate betrayal would destroy me, leaving me entirely penniless and broken. But instead of crying, I calmly looked at him, smiled, and said, "Congratulations. Let's sign the divorce papers." Everyone thought I had completely lost my mind, including his arrogant mother, who cheered when he left me for my own sister. But their victory celebration cut short at the final legal hearing. When my former mother-in-law saw what I actually left them in my departure, her face went entirely pale. She turned to her son, trembling, and whispered, "Wait, she didn't tell you?" Follow my story until the end to see the massive secret they uncovered and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Alice Thompson. I am 38 years old and for nearly a decade, my life was defined by a quiet, suffocating prison wrapped in the illusion of a happy marriage. When I married Julian, I thought I had found a partner for life. Instead, I had entered a den of wolves. For 8 long years, our household was dominated by one painful, agonizing topic: my inability to conceive a child. It didn't matter that I loved Julian fiercely or that I managed our household flawlessly, while quietly supporting his business ventures behind the scenes. In the eyes of his overbearing, cold-hearted mother, Evelyn, I was utterly worthless. "A family line needs an heir, Alice," Evelyn would sneer over Sunday dinners, her eyes sharp as glass. "Julian deserves a real family, not a hollow house." Julian never defended me. Instead, his initial warmth slowly curdled into a bitter, distant resentment. He began staying out late, his silence at home heavier than any shouting match. I bore the humiliation in silence, undergoing endless, painful medical procedures, constantly praying for a miracle to save my crumbling marriage. I thought my quiet resilience would eventually earn their respect, or at least a shred of human empathy. I was completely wrong. They didn't want a resolution. They wanted a scapegoat. Little did I know, while I was weeping in solitary rooms, Julian and his mother were already orchestrating a cruel, sickening plot designed to completely strip me of my dignity and throw me out into the street. The confrontation happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, a night that will remain burned into my memory forever. Julian walked into the living room, completely ignoring my greeting, and tossed a glossy piece of paper onto the dining table. He stood over me with a smug, mocking smirk playing on his lips. I looked down, and my breath caught in my throat. It was an ultrasound photo showing 2 tiny, developing shapes. "My sister is pregnant with twins, Alice," Julian announced, his voice dripping with an arrogant triumph that made my skin crawl. "And they are biologically mine." The room seemed to spin, but the true horror was yet to come. The surrogate carrying his children wasn't a stranger. It was Vanessa, my own estranged younger sister. Vanessa had always envied everything I had, but I never imagined her malice could run this deep. They had been sleeping together behind my back for months, fueled and encouraged by Evelyn's twisted obsession with a biological heir. Julian leaned down, crossing his arms, waiting for the screaming, the tears, and the total breakdown he believed he rightfully deserved to witness. He and his mother genuinely thought this ultimate family betrayal would leave me trapped, desperate, and completely broken at their feet. They expected me to beg for forgiveness or fight a losing battle. They wanted to watch me suffer, completely convinced that they had played the perfect hand and won the ultimate victory over my life. But instead of breaking down into the hysterical tears Julian so eagerly expected, a strange, freezing clarity washed completely over me. I looked at the ultrasound, then raised my eyes to meet his arrogant stare. I smiled, a genuine, calm smile that instantly melted the smirk right off his face. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady and completely unbothered. "Let's sign the divorce papers immediately." Julian blinked, utterly paralyzed by my reaction. He had misread my years of patient compliance as total weakness, assuming I would fight him tooth and nail. He, snorts, didn't realize that his sickening betrayal had actually set me free. The very next morning, I bypassed our usual family attorney and secretly scheduled an urgent consultation with Arthur Vance, a legendary, sharp-witted asset protection lawyer recommended by a trusted childhood friend. As Arthur systematically dug through our financial records, his eyes widened with professional delight. Julian and his mother had been so blinded by their cruel plotting and rush to secure an heir that they had completely neglected to audit the underlying architecture of their own family business. Arthur uncovered a monumental, catastrophic vulnerability in Julian's personal finances, a massive legal oversight that changed the entire playing field. "They think they are trapping you, Alice," Arthur said, leaning back with a calculating grin. "But they have just handed us the keys to their complete undoing. Say absolutely nothing, agree to their swift terms, and let them walk straight into the trap." The atmosphere inside the conference room was thick with tension, but I walked in holding my head high. Julian and Vanessa sat side by side on the opposite side of the table, holding hands with a smug, sickening display of affection. Behind them stood Evelyn, looking down at me like a victorious queen who had successfully banished an unwanted peasant from her kingdom. Their expensive attorneys slid the finalized divorce decree and asset division paperwork across the polished mahogany wood. "We've left you your personal vehicle and a small cash settlement to help you move out, Alice," the lawyer stated smoothly, his tone dripping with a patronizing pity. "Julian retains full ownership of the primary properties and the core family estate, as requested." Julian smirked, leaning forward to whisper loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Sign it, Alice. Don't embarrass yourself by dragging this out. You have nothing left here, anyway." Vanessa giggled, looking down at her manicured nails, completely unbothered by the fact that she had destroyed her own sister's life. They genuinely believed they had stripped me of my dignity, my home, and my future. They expected a hesitation, a tear, or a final plea for mercy. Instead, I pulled a sleek black pen from my purse. With a perfectly steady, knowing hand, I signed my name across the dotted lines without reading a single word out loud. I looked up, locked eyes with my former mother-in-law, and smiled. They mistook my absolute calm for total, crushed submission. They had no earthly idea that my signature was the final spark needed to detonate their entire world. The celebration at the family estate was short-lived. Julian, Vanessa, and Evelyn returned home directly from the lawyer's office, completely ecstatic, pouring glasses of expensive champagne to toast the bright future of their upcoming heirs. Evelyn sat comfortably at the head of the dining table, eagerly pulling the finalized legal papers from her designer leather bag to review the official asset transfer clauses. She wanted to savor the exact details of how they had successfully stripped me of everything. Julian leaned back in his chair, laughing, boasting about how easily I had surrendered without a fight. But as Evelyn's eyes scanned down the third page of the decree, her triumphant smile completely vanished. The room went deathly quiet. Julian noticed her hands beginning to tremble violently, the expensive paper rattling in her grip. The vibrant color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking sickly and aged. "Mom, what is it?" Julian asked, his voice losing its confident edge as he watched her chest heave. "We got the house. We got the properties. Why do you look like that?" Evelyn didn't answer him right away. She stared at the legal stamp on the page, her lips parting in utter disbelief. The cold realization of what had just occurred washed over her like an icy wave. She slowly raised her head, looking at her son with a gaze full of sheer, unadulterated horror. "Julian," she whispered, her voice cracking under the sudden weight of a catastrophic panic. "Wait. She didn't tell you?" "What are you talking about, Mom?" Julian demanded, snatching the legal decree straight out of her shaking hands. He scanned the pages frantically, his eyes landing on the corporate disclosure clauses attached to the back of the agreement. What he didn't know, and what his mother had just realized, was the secret reality of how our finances were actually structured. 8 years ago, when we first started the family business, Julian's credit was completely ruined. To secure the initial commercial funding and corporate licensing, my father had quietly stepped in as the primary guarantor, placing the entire corporate enterprise and its intellectual assets solely under my name. Julian had managed the day-to-day operations, but legally, he was nothing more than an employee. Furthermore, over the last 3 years, Julian had secretly taken out massive personal loans to fund his extravagant lifestyle and impress Vanessa, using the family estate as unverified collateral. By eagerly rushing to sign the swift divorce agreement without an independent financial audit, Julian had explicitly agreed to split our personal liabilities while forfeiting any claim to my independent corporate holdings. He had knowingly signed a clause stating he assumed full individual responsibility for all debts tied to his name and primary properties. The core business assets, the actual source of their wealth, remained entirely mine. Julian was left holding properties that were heavily leveraged, saddling him with over $2 million in toxic immediate debt while his bank accounts were practically empty. "She trapped us," Evelyn wailed, dropping her champagne glass as it shattered against the floor. Vanessa began to panic, clutching her stomach as the reality of their financial ruin set in. The ultimate heir they had sacrificed everything to secure would now be born into absolute bankruptcy. 3 months later, I sat on the veranda of my new coastal home, watching the waves crash peacefully against the shore. The air was crisp, clean, and entirely free from the suffocating toxicity that had plagued my life for 8 long years. By selling my shares of the highly profitable core logistics enterprise, I secured enough wealth to live comfortably for the rest of my days, completely independent of anyone else's approval. Through my attorney, I received word of the chaotic aftermath left in my wake. Julian was forced to file for corporate bankruptcy after his creditors immediately called in the massive leveraged loans on the estate. Unable to afford the heavy mortgage payments, Evelyn was evicted from her beloved home and forced to move into a cramped rented apartment. Vanessa, realizing the wealthy lifestyle she had desperately plotted to steal had completely vanished, abandoned Julian before the twins were even born, leaving their fractured family drowning in legal battles and bitter mutual resentment. Their greed had delivered its own perfect punishment. Now, I am curious about all of you who have followed my journey until the very end. What would you have done if you found yourself standing in my exact shoes? Have you ever had to face a shocking family betrayal and find the strength to walk away cleanly? Comment your thoughts below. Meanwhile, I am leaving 2 other incredible surprising stories right here on the screen that I know you will absolutely love. Thank you so much for watching.